So here's a very good evening to everyone in our audiences today for this episode of Right Circle, which is in association with Prabha Khaitan Foundation. It's presented by Shri Cements, and we also have SAS Women and the Spagia Foundation with us as our co supporters and organizers. Um, we are welcoming today someone who is of great repute. Her book on climate change called The Climate Solution, India's Climate Change Crisis and What We Can Do About It, caused a lot of ripples, primarily, I think, because it was content heavy and very well researched and also very fluidly written. We have with us today Mridula Ramesh. She is also the founder of the Sundaram Climate Institute, which focuses on waste and water solutions and education. She's a graduate from Cornell University with an MBA from Kellogg. My God, that's overwhelming. And she's also a regular columnist with, we've lost Swati, guys, columnist with a lot of leading portals and magazines and newspapers. I'm going to request my audiences to please bear with us. I think it's raining really heavily here and internet connectivity might be an issue. Just give me a minute till Swati comes back.
You know, the interesting thing for the second book is I actually start with Rajasthan.
Oh, nice. That's amazing.
And the second book is on water. So one of the things that stands out and the intersection between climate change and water is that India anyway gets very few rain days. That is, I think most part of India's rain falls in about 100 hours in a year. That's it. So as you can imagine, when it rains, it really pours, like what it may be doing there now. And climate change is said to shrink that number of days further.
Oh my God.
So you're going to get more intensive rainfall going forward.
But intensive means that you can't do water harvesting as effectively as otherwise, right?
Pardon?
I'm asking if it's intensive bouts of rain, then can you do water harvesting as effectively?
Excellent question. The answer is yes and no. It depends on the original design and capacity of your water harvest system. Every system has a design capacity in mind. So if you've designed for that kind of like a big burst of rainfall and that quantity falling in that short time, then it can. Else it can't. But the problem really is that many people don't have working harvesting structures. I think the state you're from, Rajasthan, and the state I'm from, Tamil Nadu, sort of get it because we've been hit enough times on the head with it. But the rest of India, not so much.
Right, because I don't know why you're saying that Rajasthan gets it. I don't think we do.
Well, I'm speaking relatively speaking.
Okay, all right, maybe, yes. Because I'm always hypercritical of what's happening in the state. I see so much.
All of us are. So I think, but it's in terms of spectrum. That's what we are doing.
Right, so we have Swati back, and she's our moderator for today. I think all of you from Jaipur are very familiar with Swati Vashishtha, who has been a journalist for 15 years with National.
Swati, sometimes if that happens, what works is if you turn off your video.
I think I'm going to.
Yeah.
No, you're right. I'm going to do that if that happens.
Okay.
But I think I've missed the what has happened so far. Have we been introduced?
Started. I think Meeta introduced me, so we should probably get started given that it's
okay.
You have so many questions, so.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Hi everyone, a warm welcome to the special session of the Right Circle. It's a pleasure to be back here. At the very outset, a big thank you is in order to the entire team of the Right Circle for continuing to bring us these sessions against the odds that the pandemic has posed. The pandemic is understood to have been a fallout of messing with nature. The lockdown has made many of us step back and reflect. It's the question that logically is it too late to act, Or can we still recalibrate our relationship with the planet and give ourselves a new lease of life? Climate change here is a crucial issue that affects all of us. And that is precisely what Mridula's book, The Climate Solution in Climate Change Crisis and What We Can Do About It, discusses. The beauty of this book is that its hook is solution. It's divided into two parts. The first half, of course, is insights into the climate change facets and how bad it really is. And the second half is my favorite, roadmap to action, complete with a checklist for the government, institutions, individuals, for you and me. Am I audible, or should I turn off the video and try this?
You're audible for the most part, Swati. I can't talk about how others are hearing it. Some parts are getting stopped up.
Okay. The best time to climate change crisis was day before yesterday, as the book also tells you. Next best time is today, and the best time to act is right after the session. In case anyone to be convinced about that, Mridula, I'm sure, will convince them about over the next half hour or so. But he can act really. And the roadmap for that should be, if that is something of interest to you, please do go pick up the book, because that's exactly.
Meeta, should I just, sort of until Swati comes, because it's been about 10 minutes and people may be getting restless.
Yeah, so I think, can you...
First, thankfully, Swati sent me all the questions. So I'll just ask the first question and then start off, and then hopefully Swati can connect by that time. Is that okay?
Go off video and then connect.
So the first question Swati actually had was, she said that, when and how did it occur to you that climate change is real? What drove you to write this book? So I don't know whether you want to take this as the hopeful way or not, but I didn't know what climate change was at all. I think close to a decade ago. I didn't know such a thing existed. And why that is particularly surprising is, many people, I do like the environment, and I do think that, forests and wildlife are very interested. I think many of us who live in cities, that's the first level that we connect at. And I have a science background. And Cornell is one of those really liberal and, environmental kind of places, but I really didn't know at all. I was quite comfortable in my corporate life, etc. And about 7 years ago, I had my second child, and the delivery was not great. So I had to take time off. And I think this is something that many people can sort of empathize with, where you're forced to sort of step off the rat race and the treadmill. And that's when you start looking around you and sort of stepping out of the bubble we tend to surround ourselves by. And it just coincidentally happened at that time that we ran out of water in our house. And in our house, we don't get municipal water, and we get bore water. And at that time, our bore had gone down to about 550 feet, and it was dry. So, usually we might have tried to fix it, but we were spending so much money buying water. And that, with a combination of just not working for a little while, I started looking around, and then I said, this climate change, this doesn't seem to be just running out of water, because it was warmer than usual. That's something we don't notice. Many of us sit in AC rooms and we don't notice it at all. And like something's going on. But that's where the scientific training also came into help, because I was comfortable reading journal articles and, reaching out to scientists to ask a question if I had it. And bit by bit, I put it on and I said, this seems really serious. And this was back in 2012-13. And I said, why is no one talking about it? So then I started teaching in a local school, in my children's school actually. And out of a suggestion out of that, I started writing a column also. And that's really what spurred me to write this book. It just came out of the column, and as I found out more, I realized there was a need to communicate to others more. in a language they understood. So the first column was about 30 columns in the Hindu Metro Plus. And if any of you get to meet my husband, you'll realize he's very sarcastic. And he said, you know, you need to hold the attention of all these people, despite, you know, attractive faces about you. So, you know, and there'll be like, this actress did this and that actress did that, and then you'll be writing about climate change. So it was writing about climate change in a way that people understood. So, you know, one step led to the other, and that's how the book came about. So Meeta, at this point, if Swati is back on, do we want to just continue?
Mridula, she's just coming on, and I've told her to remain off video, and yeah, there she is.
Okay.
Swati, Mridula's, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
No, Swati, you need to unmute yourself. Oh. Swati?
Am I audible?
Yeah, now. So she's already gone through your first question.
Right. My apologies for this. It's suddenly the weather is really bad and probably the internet is acting up. So I should go to the second question. So Mridula, what indicators would you use to articulate how bad the climate crisis really is? And how achievable do you see the carbon budget goals as?
Okay. So first shout out, Swati, I think your questions are really, really thought-provoking. And, you know, at the end of the day, if you ask, you know, the first thing you learn when you formally learn about climate changes, it's a 0.8 degree increase over the last 100 years. And if you try telling that to anyone, they're like, big deal. You know, it changes more than several degrees between one day to another. You know, when you step out of one room to the other. So, you know, big deal. That's the first thing you get, because it seems such a tiny little increase in temperature. And how can that create such a big, you know, change that everybody seems to be getting so bothered about? And I think that's why the first half of the book is the way it is. It is relating climate change to India, okay, in language Indians understand, and to things that are important in India, right? And in India, climate change is all about water. The floods, the droughts, and the incidents thereof. I mean, if you look in the book itself, you know, there are charts that show you how, if you step back over 100 years, I mean, what was really nothing, I'm going to try and do this, has just shot up through the roof. And you don't see that. I mean, today is totally different, like, and that really tells you, like, in 5 years how things change so rapidly. Because in 2015, when I started writing about climate change, my family really thought this was a midlife crisis gone badly wrong. And today it's much less hard to go and talk about climate change to people, because you don't have to start by saying, is this real? You don't have to fight that battle. But back then you did have to. So the key point I want to mention here is talk about indicators of climate change in things that matter to them. So for instance, floods that you're familiar with, storms that I think you're undergoing one right now. Drought is something that Rajasthan and Tamil Nadu are both very, very familiar with, right?
Right.
Just going through long gaps without any rain and having very temperamental rainfall. And the thing about climate change is it leads to an intensification, which is, I was just mentioning to Meeta that, you know, the number of days on which it rains is going to shrink. And at the same time, when it rains, it's really going to pour, right? I think these are all things that people in Rajasthan will be very, very familiar with. Unfortunately for Rajasthan and Tamil Nadu, some of these places are expected, and there's a lot of uncertainty there, to get less rain going forward. So, you know, if we get about 800 millimeters of rain, that's expected to go down, right? So, you know, but there is a lot of uncertainty with that, and it's also unfair to blame climate change with that. If I talk to business leaders about climate change, I really talk about climate risks to their factories. For instance, we will start seeing investor action on climate change. We may start if we don't go the route of greenwashing, we could actually get meaningful consumer choices based on the climate. So these are all indicators that matter to the person who's listening. So talking in the language of the listener becomes very, very important. And not talking about it, but at the end of the day, it is only a temperature. It is at the heart of it, it's a temperature change.
Right. And how achievable do the carbon budget goals seem to you? This the 12-year window, and we should keep the temperatures within a certain limit. How achievable does that seem like?
Okay, so that's a great question again. See, the carbon budget is it is based on an understanding of how the climate system works. And our understanding of the climate system is evolving. So the whole second chapter of the book talks about all the, how our understanding has grown and how many uncertainty there is still in that understanding, right? So if you take a financial example, right? So the income that you get is primarily salaries, or if you're lucky enough to have a pot of money, then interest or dividend or things like that. Your expenses are rent, food, electricity, fuel for your car, etc. So there is a carbon budget. So things like plants suck up carbon dioxide out of the air, oceans suck it up, deep oceans suck up more. The weathering process where carbon gets absorbed into the rocks sucks it up still more. And there are things that emit carbon dioxide. Humanity is the latest entrant to this party, but this is a dance that's been going on over thousands of years. And one thing we don't understand, and we need to understand this relative calm in the climate, which allowed for agriculture to come up, is a very recent phenomenon, right? It's only happened in the last 10,000 years. And now we're really pushing the carbon dioxide to levels which, humanity has never seen before. And so now scientists are saying, okay, the ocean can take so much, this can take so much. So given this capacity, this structure of, the Earth's carbon balance sheet, I can put out this much more carbon dioxide to keep the warming up to the end of the century, up to a particular limit. Now, the way I've explained it itself is at the most simplistic form, you can see how complex it is, right? But then there's so much uncertainty. How much can the soil take up? Because at over a particular temperature, the soil will start emitting rather than taking it, right? Historically, temperature has always gone before carbon dioxide because there are vast stores of methane in the Arctic and under the seabed. And if those start, breaking up as the temperature increases and start releasing the methane, then we are into runaway climate change, right? We're going into something called the hothouse planet. So there's a lot of uncertainty there.
Right.
And initially it was thought there's, I think, about 3-4 years left before we could emit enough and stay within 1.5 degree increase from pre-industrial times. Well,
Right.
you can do a little bit of fiddling to make people give a little more hope. And what people have, the increased span of about 10 years that you hear is really based on saying, I will start sucking out a lot of carbon dioxide come 2050. So we'll emit a little bit more. It's like, it's like holiday eating. I'll eat all I want for Diwali, but I'm telling you I'll go on that diet and lose all that weight later. It's
Right.
harder sucking out carbon dioxide. Okay. So a lot of the carbon math does it that way. But one thing I want people to take away from this is carbon has inertia in the climate. Right, so if we stop all emissions now, we just shut down every light, every coal plant, we don't travel, it's lockdown without AC, without Netflix, without anything, right? And we get to that.
Right.
So climate will still continue to warm.
Yeah.
Okay, because
You talked about that in your book as well, yeah.
So I think that's something to keep in mind. And, this is the whole premise for the book. The title I actually had for the book was called Adapt. And, it was based on the fact that we have crossed the budget. We've baked in the warming, right? At the very least, it's the single most vulnerable country in the world, right?
India.
Baked in enough warming that we need to focus on adaptation.
Right. So we'll come to that. But before that, take us through how climate change interacts with health, and more specifically mental health, because that's an area that rarely gets talked about, and especially in context of climate change, it rarely gets talked about.
Okay. So health, if you look at it, I think in the book I talk about heat waves, which I'll skip now. I think given the time constraints, I think it's when it gets hotter, especially when it's humid heat, your body can't shut down, so it weakens you, and if you get dehydrated, you'll die. So that's very quickly. I think a person who's got dengue twice, it's a big deal for me. It's the singularly most painful disease you can ever go through, and climate change alters the way the virus behaves inside the mosquito, and it makes it far more likely for dengue to be transmitted, right? So anyone in the audience who has had dengue, it's not a great thing. Then,
Right.
as far as mental health is concerned, now imagine the people in Mumbai and Calcutta right now, right? So today I don't even have to go to last year or the year before last to think of climate change examples. They're there every month as we speak. A lot of people have lost homes. A lot of people have come home to fields. 20 years ago, those people might have died, right? So today we've got to early warning systems so they don't lose their lives. So they've lost their livelihood, right? If
Right.
you've borrowed to sort of sow a field, but you come back to a field that has been overtaken by the sea, what are you going to do? Sure, you're alive, you're healthy, but
Right.
you've got that blow now, right? So if you look at farmer suicides, that's the tip of the iceberg as far as mental health is concerned, right? So you have, just post-traumatic stress syndrome is one end of the thing. But if you keep on, if you were sitting at, say, a marginal farmer who, borrows to plow, you really look at it and you say, I don't see an upside to this. And at that point, depression begins to hit. And once
Right.
depression begins to hit, you need to get treated, because otherwise that filter is not going away. And that's the second part. So I actually found out that there were only 4,000 trained psychiatrists or some number like that. And of course, my husband, being my husband, said, this number is false. Okay. So then my friend who's a psychiatrist, he came and said, Mridula's going on about this. I don't think she's right. And my friend said, she's not only right, but 3,000 of them are in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So, it is ridiculous that we do not have, I don't know how many psychiatrists there are in in Jaipur, for instance. And what do you do for mental health? Already there's a stigma, right? If you're going to see a psychiatrist, you're mad. So, you've got the problem, but you can't, you don't seek help because of stigma, and then B, there are not enough people trained to give you the kind of help you need. I think we're sort of really shooting ourselves in the foot as far as this is concerned. And this is going to explode. I can't hear you.
Am I audible to you?
Yeah, now I can.
Yeah. So I was saying that a linked aspect of this is that how women stand to be hit in worse ways if the climate change crisis deepens.
Okay, so there are three ways I talk about women being hit in the book. I'll talk about one now. That is as caregivers, right? So typically the caregiving in any family of either children or older people falls on a woman, right? And when you start getting into this pattern of floods and droughts and that cycle of vector-borne diseases and diarrhea and everything else that comes in, a woman will now have to spend a disproportionately higher share of her time looking after a sick child or an older adult, right? She herself may not be vulnerable, but in caring for others, she will become more vulnerable, and that is time that she would have used for leisure or sleep or, working or whatever that has to go into this now. There is another role where a woman is typically responsible for the water of the household, so collecting water, etc. So in our study, we found out many times that just means standing, outside at 2 o'clock in the morning, collecting water from the tanker that comes. Again, that is slated to increase, so that will reduce the time for leisure or sleep or thing. And that's not something Indian women have in spades in any case. And, a related facet of that is Indian female workforce participation is amongst the worst in the world. It's worse than Bangladesh. And I think urban Tamilian, workforce participation is worse than Saudi Arabia, which is horrifying but true. And that is slated to go down. Okay. So I think next question was, geopolitically, you've pointed out how India is not amongst the biggest contributors to emissions. Yes, it is yet it is one of the most vulnerable countries when it comes to being affected by climate change. Actually, are we in this together? To what degree will any country stand or gain if things go nothing? Okay. So this is again, one of the dirty little, okay, Swati, do you want to go ahead or? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I think you just read out the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, please go ahead and answer.
That's fine.
No, that's all right. Please go ahead and answer.
See, I think one of the dirty little secrets of climate change is the fact that there are winners and losers here, right? It's always perplexing if this is such a giant threat to humanity. I mean, let's not forget the Earth was a place where once camels walked in Canada, right? And giant dinosaurs roamed the Earth. So is climate change the end of this world? No. Is it the end of humanity? No, right? But it's going to make India's life a heck of a lot harder. So I think that's the nuance I really wanted to get out of this. Like, your growing seasons in Russia and Northern Europe and Canada will increase. Cooling, heating costs will decrease for them. Their summer season, their tourist seasons will start increasing. Stuff like what's happening in Jaipur as we speak. If you start getting very staccated kind of rainfall, an event that should have been smooth, I know how much follow-up meter is put into this. It should have been as smooth as silk, but this is something that is really, climate and weather related, that there's just so much you can do about it. And all of this is lost productivity, right? If this was now telemedicine with a doctor consulting for a patient, this stagnation will have serious repercussions, right? So, for, I think, crop yields, I'm sort of wary of making generalizations because so much can change. But without adaptation, I think it's safe to say that crop yields will fall by 10 to 20% or even more, right? It's just that, will you flourish if you're sitting in a place where you don't get food very regularly and it's hotter than you like it to be? No, nor will plants, right? I think it's safe to say that, our cooling costs are going to go up. So that's less money you would have had to spend on anything else. So I think there are winners and losers here. And that is very, very important to understanding why the world is not acting as fast as it can in solving this problem. Right? And that again adds the second bullet in why I think India should focus on adaptation. Swati, so I'm done with that.
Yeah, no. So if you feel that the stakes do substantially vary, how different do you think what should India's strategy really be if that factored in?
So let me not even go to India, right? Let me stick with Jaipur. I think, Jaipur is going to get hit hard, right? Rajasthan and Tamil Nadu are two states. There's no state in India that's going to have it easy, but Rajasthan will definitely have it hard. And I think, you really need to focus on adaptation. And so do we. In Madurai, we really need to focus on adaptation. Because you've got the warming work, baked in. You're populated and you're poor. So you've just got all these things going against you. So you really need to focus on
It's interesting how you shifted focus to Jaipur, and Rajasthan has hospitality industry as one of the key sort of, the driving industries here. And you have a chapter on monsters that are the biggest roadblocks to meaningful action. And there you talk about tokenism, which not just keeps people from meaningful action, but also gives a false sense of having taken action. And that's something that one gets to see here. That's something I immediately related to, because you go to a whole lot of hotels in Jodhpur and in really dry, arid areas, and they have jacuzzis and things like that, And then, of course, like you've said in your book as well, they have those nicely written handouts saying how we're so conscious about keeping the place, like green and saving water and things like that. How big a deterrent do you feel is tokenism in meaningful action?
Well, it's the single biggest deterrent, right? So the first thing is, I mean, there's a whole chapter on the psychology of climate change there. So, part of it is ignorance, which is alive and kicking in India. So for my water book, we've done a survey of almost 2,000 households in Madurai. And then we had about 700 answers where we asked people about climate change. Close to 50% don't know what it is, right? So I think that's significant. And so there's ignorance. But then once you want to, know what it is, and the next question is, hey, what do I do about it? You can either get overwhelmed and say, I'm one person, what can I do? And I go through that also. But the worst thing is tokenism, especially in this day of Twitter and Facebook and everything else, that like or that, share. A like and a share is not an action. Let's be very, very clear about that, right? It really, you've taken energy to do that without really a transmittable result. And one of the more pernicious forms of tokenism is greenwashing, which is what a lot of corporates do. They see that customers are willing, they value being seen as green, but they're not necessarily willing to pay for it. So they go for greenwashing. I don't think the customers are entirely blameless in this, but please, a like is not an action. Let's be very clear on that.
Right. And I think what's worse is thinking that you have acted after, liking someone's post or, So speaking of adaptation, waste management is crucial to preventing the climate crisis from intensifying. And there's a lot of talk on that front in terms of making waste into a resource, but there's minimal action. And you talk about how you transitioned into living a zero waste lifestyle now. What does it take to be able to do that?
So I think, again, this is all stuff I never knew anything about. So the journey has not been smooth and it has not been even. But let me tell you, we've been doing this for about 5 years now. It's been relatively successful. So let me tell you what I did. And this is something that while scaling up also, whether it be a house, a flat, office, a factory, a city, whichever, it will work at all scales. The first thing is do nothing, right? Just watch what you're doing for 2 weeks. And preferably if it's, let me talk at the level of a house, everybody watches what they're doing, and you note down some kind of a number, your amount of waste in buckets, because a lot of people just take it in buckets and then dump it outside or bags or whatever, just watch how much waste you first generate. I think that's very important to understand. Then understand where and what kind of waste. So, the early days had a lot of tilting over waste paper baskets and just seeing what we did. So in our house, we found out we were generating a lot of garden waste, a lot of food waste, and then other stuff. So, and I also found out that because I don't cook, I compensate by buying fancy things which I never use. So that was, a large part of the waste. And we set up a system, again, because I don't cook, and we have a cook, and my husband, who, you know his personality by now, said, don't start your stupid experimentation here, because you will travel, and if the cook quits, then life's not good. So whatever, this again came from a lesson from manufacturing, which is what I was trained in. and we were one of the first textile mills in the world to win the TPM award, which is like the Deming Award for manufacturing. And the whole point of TPM, and if you go to Japan, you see that in their design of their cities also, is to make things idiot-proof. Poker yoke, which is idiot-proofing. And that just meant today segregating in our house takes no additional time over just doing what you normally do, right? Not even a second more, not an added action. And the simplest thing we found was just put open buckets. Don't put dustbins with lids, because people lifting the lid and putting something in doesn't work. So just keep open lids. And we've had a lot of tours coming and seeing our house. We don't have flies, because when you manage it on a daily basis, it sort of works. The second thing, which is very important, is if something's smelly and yucky to do, you will never do it, right? So you have to find a solution that is neither smelly nor yucky. So we have a biogas plant, and people who come to our house take a deep breath out of it. It doesn't smell, and it saves us between half to 1 cylinder a month. So it also saves us money, right? So I think those are all things I go into detail, but I'll stick to that for now, but keep it easy. And if something's going to take more effort or it'll smell, you'll never do it.
Yeah, no, I think the details are there in the book. So that's an additional reason for people to pick up the book and look at exactly how to do it. So the struggle to pressurize policymakers and politicians, governments, people to basically sit up and take note of the climate change crisis and act towards driving solutions require disruptive methods, do you think? And how big a role do you see, for instance, of a Greta Thunberg style activism?
See, I think one of the things her movement has been very useful in doing is sort of getting many investors to think that, this is a problem and this is not what we want to do. And I think that has been very useful because people are skittish in seeing protests, etc. I've shied away from policy for a very long time. It's just with this water policy that I finally got involved in, talking to government, etc. Otherwise, I shy away from that. I think if one surprising thing for me for my book was bureaucrats found it very helpful, especially local level bureaucrats, because it told them what are the risks and how they could manage. That's why I feel, when you go towards adaptation always works best at the more decentralized level it is, a house or a neighborhood or a city or a neighbor, and there I think private action becomes far more or as important as government action, right? And there I feel rather than activism, partnership works is more effective in my experience.
Right. Shifting gears a bit, we've seen the government launch a brand new education policy. How important do you feel it is to introduce young people to the climate change crisis and make them aware and help them scout for solutions in that space? And do you feel that any substantial steps have so far been taken in that direction?
Okay, so I'll answer the second part first. I think the answer is yes, and I wouldn't have said it if I hadn't seen the data from our own study, right? So there is a very clear correlation between education and age and whether people think climate change is real and is caused by humanity, etc., right? So there is obviously, we see like a significant and substantial difference in our own survey. So, people less than 25 who are diploma holders or graduates are overwhelmingly supportive of both the fact that climate change exists, that it's caused by humanity, and action is required. So yes, there is something happening. But I do want to mention a study that I recently saw in a conference I went to. It was by a school teacher in a government school from Odisha. And he found that, if you teach things like water or climate change with a local example, or anything, or even mathematics with a local example, kids get it like that, right? And I think the absence of local examples in our schools, and that's not something that can be centrally drilled down. It's something that, citizens like those listening to this conversation have to do, that is increase the local content in curriculum. And that's, I think, more decentralized, and it's very, very effective. Sure, you can teach math. I mean, you can teach mensuration and geometry using climate-related local examples, and people are doing it, and it's proving to be very effective.
Right. Unemployment has been a huge problem in India for quite some time now, and the pandemic has made matters worse on that front. We saw how the migrants' crisis tragically unfolded. You have not just been funding clean tech startups, but you also talk about in your book the possibilities of creating good jobs in the field of waste management. Where do you think the gaps here are?
Okay. So I think here, even though I say I shy away from policy, this is the one actually policy thing that I've put in the checklist at the end of my book. I think, Bangalore, Indo, Bhopal are all much ahead of other cities in India because they have a policy in place, right? So they say bulk generators, so any apartment, that or factory or office that generates over a particular quantum of waste a day have to manage the waste themselves, right? They can't dump it into the corporation, but they can tap private sources to help them do it. So, I have a couple of investments in waste management startup. Surprise, surprise, they're all from Bangalore, right? I mean, that's because of the policy. And they're all, what is their next step of geographical expansion? Indoor, right? So it's like, why this is happening. And, to me, this is one of the most hopeful things in climate change because it's easy to do. In my own house, I see, if you manage waste well, what a resource it can be. I mean, if you come into our house, it is like a lush jungle. And that to a very large extent is because of the compost, because we really feed our plants crap water. And, the gas that we get saved, the vegetables we grow, all because of the fact we look at waste as a resource, which, for 2000 years, we've always done it. It's just the last 100, 150 years that mindset, not even 100, 50 years to a larger extent, that mindset has left our thinking. But apart from that, when you get, these rag pickers, if you go through their lives, it's a horrible tragedy, right? They have lower life expectancy, mucking in the landfill. I mean, I can't think of a worse form of hell. And if you actually segregate and give them PF, ESI, there is a story I have of a rag picker I spoke to who sent her daughter to engineering school. I think, come on, this is so easy to get. We get benefit from it. We help a lot of people. I think this is
right.
Policy, very simple to do. Bulk generators should go zero waste.
Right. While some of the individual, and community-driven stories that you have also mentioned in your book of adaptation are truly inspiring, do you think we can really hold the bull by its horns until everyone is equally alive to the concerns of the climate change crisis? And for you, where does hope come from in all of this?
Swati, I'm not sure I actually understood that question. So let me take a crack at it and tell me whether I've understood you or not. So can you keep climate change at bay until everyone gets it? Is that what you're trying to tell me? In that case, no, we cannot. Right? And I don't think everybody is going to get it at any point in time, because there are some people whose livelihood depends on them not getting it. So trying to persuade them is going to head nowhere. Right? But I think climate change is one of those sledgehammer kind of things where I know, like I hang out in corporate circles. Okay, if there are skeptics amongst us, they're all there. Right? So I sort of, from day one in my journey, it's like midlife crisis, rubbish, all these, leftist sort of thing. I mean, that's what I've grown up with. I mean, every minute, it's something I face. So climate change is sort of hits you hard enough that probably the best thing you can do out of it is not take ideology out of it, and everybody sort of then says, yeah, this is serious, right? I cannot. You're seeing the rain, you're seeing the floods. I think
Yeah.
It's gone beyond anybody not getting it at this point. And I don't think few heroes doing their little bit here and there is going to hold it at bay. Right? I think you really have to rethink your way of life. And that's why I feel the decentralized approach, which is not top-down driven, but each city sort of getting hit hard enough that it can then build consensus to make the action work. So what gives me hope? Right, I'll come to that. At the end of the day, my house is the only house that does not buy water. Every day I hear the motors run in all my neighboring houses, where they're buying tanker water and getting it pumped into their tanks. Madurai had the worst drought in 100 years. And even then, we didn't buy water. Right? So, what gives me hope when I see a country like Israel, desert land, growing crops till the eye can see, and exporting virtual and fresh water. Singapore, they've all gotten it, okay? And they're all democracies. So when they did the tough action, they got, called names and all of that. They went through that. That gives me hope that A, the problem is solvable. And we'll finally get to it if we get hit hard enough and consistently enough, which is going to happen.
So I think one last question, and then we can probably move on to opening the floor for questions from the audience. I'm sure there are many questions, but you've written about climate change crisis, and you've touched upon several technical issues in your book, and yet it's written very accessibly. How much effort did that sort of a thing take? Because it doesn't, it's like you just break it down to basics and speak the language of, I think, most readers. So how did you manage to do that?
Okay, so the first time I wrote it, I got rejected, which was convinced me that it's not going to work. So that always helps. Again, it was writing in Metro Plus, and I gave the comment. I mean, I said it in a more open fashion to you. I won't repeat the same words again, but I had to compete with the very attractive women on the same page for
Right.
So you had to sort of. I've had fairly harsh critics at home, so. Breaking it down, and the first class I taught was actually at the school level, right? So there was you had to break it down, and I've been using this material to teach consistently, wide variety of audiences.
Right.
So that also helps craft the message a little bit.
Makes sense. So I think, and on that note, we can open the floor for questions to the audience. But before that, I want to thank you for this very informative, engaging conversation and the book. And your next one is on water, is what you've, you told me earlier. And considering how valuable this one is, we're completely looking forward to that as well.
Thank you so much, Swati.
Thank you, Mridula and Swati, for such a stimulating discussion. Now, I would request our audiences to please use the raise the hand option, and you can ask questions, and I will unmute you. We have Sathes Kumar with the first question.
Hello, I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, right. So thanks for the discussion. It was insightful. And I'm really thankful that you brought up adaptation in the talk, because the first thing I hear about climate change is that, how do you represent climate change is through temperature change, right? So you tell it's 1.5 degrees Celsius, and why 1.5 degrees Celsius? Because of carbon emissions. So what I'm really concerned about is that criticisms about climate change, climate action get subsumed into carbon emissions. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most important factors in terms of mitigation. But then, as you rightly said, there's no one talking about climate change adaptation. I feel there's no linkage of climate change between locust attacks and let's say the climate change coming up in talks against EAA, but then climate change to be seen as just as a entity that has to do with carbon emissions. So you also spoken on some parts of it. How do you kind of take this discourse to the public to believe that climate change is not just a number, either it's carbon budget or it's temperature change to 1.5 degrees Celsius or it's within 2030, these kinds of numbers beyond that?
So thank you for the question. Yeah, I sense your frustration and I share it too, which is why I wrote the book. I mean, I totally believe climate change is a lot more than carbon. Carbon is the causative factor, right? And I think one thing which I didn't mention, which is in the book, and is that India is not that big an emitter, relatively speaking. And the calculations are all there in a book and in another talk I gave, so I'm happy to share that. But I think, and the other thing is, India has a very meaningful carbon price. So, given our cess on coal and the excise duty that we pay on our oil products, we actually have a fairly meaningful carbon price, and our emissions have, our carbon intensity of GDP, that is how much carbon we use per unit of GDP we create, is actually coming down. It's coming down like this, which is why the problems with our coal plants is that they actually don't have enough demand in much of the cases. So what do I do about it? I write about it, I talk about it, and in any forum that I'm invited to be part of, I bring it up. This is something I really feel very strongly about. So I said, India has to focus on adaptation very critically. We're doing a pretty decent job in terms of mitigation, but I think we really need to focus on adaptation. And if you can sell the thing of finding things that you can do both, like forests, where it has both adaptive and mitigative roles to play, then all the better. Waste is another one of those.
Right, thanks. Just a small follow-up question. How do you see the sector agriculture being impacted in the sense both? Someone who a sector which will be under repercussions of climate change, and as a sector which does have not so significant but still a fair number of.
Agriculture is a very significant contributor to climate.
Right, at least in Indian context.
Contributors to climate change. So yeah, I think there's so much in the book about agriculture, and I think I'll just quote one of the scientists who didn't want to be named. I think in the next 5 years or so, we need to fix some of the access issues in agriculture, which some states are doing better than others, right? The hard end of climate change will not start to hit in about 10 to 15 years, by which time we do need seeds that are engineered to withstand the drought and the water variability that comes along with it. I think agriculture is going to be hit really hard, and that is central to why India is vulnerable. So I think a large part of that is actually about fixing water access, which some states have done. I don't know whether that answered your question, but I'll stop at that. But I'm happy to take it up if anybody else wants to go more deep.
We have the next question from Kamakshi Chauhan.
He seems like a simple man.
Hello, Mridula. That was a very interesting session, and definitely not as grim as I thought a session on climate change would be. My question is, you spoke about a zero waste lifestyle. So is that lifestyle only for the privileged? Like, you've been practicing it. So what are your thoughts on that? Is it
first, it's not zero waste, it's net zero waste. It's a slight technical thing. So we used to send out about 17 kilos of waste. We send out about 400 grams. So just let me be honest, it's in the book, so I just want to mention that. No, I don't think it's for the privileged at all. Yeah? I think, the lower you go on the economic platform, the less waste you typically generate. That's not always true, because as you replace, say, a shampoo bottle with a sachet of shampoo, your ratio of packaging to material will go up. But certainly, I think the footprint of the wealthier you are, your waste footprint goes higher. So, the poor are already sort of in a close to zero thing. They do have a higher footprint of plastic, which does require some degree of management at the ward level, which is happening in places like Bangalore. So I don't think going zero waste is at all for the privileged. But I do think the privileged have a greater sense of they need to do it preferentially.
Thank you so much.
We have the next question from Mita.
Hi, Mridula. I really didn't want to interrupt, but you mentioned that you are working on your next book, which is on water, and that it starts with Rajasthan. So tell us a little bit about that, unless, I mean, the publisher is forbidding you to do so.
No, I don't think so. I think if you talk about water, I don't think you can get away from Rajasthan. And Rajendra Singh, Rajendra ji, as I call him, is a friend. So definitely his story. But I think, you know, I actually start with Jaisalmer. And, you know, the types of water management that were done earlier and now. And a large part of the book actually talks about a place which is somewhat similar in climate is, you know, the Indus Valley. The climate change, this current book doesn't have too much history in it. But the second book, because it's on water, and India has a really interesting water history, and a large part of it is about the Indus. So, you know, Western Rajasthan, you know, was part of the Indus Valley civilization. So it really starts with there and how water was managed in times of yore. And I got caught up there perhaps more than I should have, which is why I'm struggling to finish the book now.
Yeah, thanks so much. And with that last question, we will come to an end with I think it was a very, very essential session. I think all of us need to read Mridula's book and understand where we are heading with climate change. But I'd like to thank you, Mridula, for having borne with the technical glitches first and also been so patient with my incessant emailing. I know how annoying that can get when you're trying to finish a book and otherwise also. And Swati, thank you so much for moderating. You're stellar as always. I'd like to thank my audiences for having stayed with us and joined us for this session of Right Circle. You guys have any questions that come to you later, you can always email and we'll get Mridula to answer, but do buy her book. I mean, it's available online. Books are getting delivered now. So I hope each one of you will pick up her book, because I think we really need to be very, very conscious moving forward. Thank you, everyone, once again. Thank you so much, Mridula and Swati.
Thank you, Swati.
Thank you. Thanks so much.